Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the idea that was floated. I think I saw it on History Debunked channel. That if all, and others have mentioned this too, but if all immigration to the West stopped today, and the project was then to assimilate the people, the masses of people, the mass immigration that's happened over the last 20 years, to assimilate those people into the West, how long would that assimilation process take? How many years or decades or whatever. So, and the following question: is it even possible to assimilate them? Given how many of these people come from completely different cultures and attitudes and views, and how they've come to the West not to integrate, not to assimilate. They've just come for the free stuff, just a better quality of life here. But most of these people perceive themselves, the brown and black people perceive themselves to be morally and spiritually and socially superior to the white Westerners. So why would they integrate with people who are inferior to them? So those are the wider issues. So let me talk a little bit about that. Now, the statistics aren't hopeful, and I've done a video on this previously, that of the brown and black migrants that have been force-fed by the globalists into the West against the will, completely against the will of the local populace, of those people, the intermarriage is very low. They're about 2%. And I can't see any stimulus that's going to push that much above the 2%. Some races are hugely resistant to integration, and I've mentioned these things before. Indians that left India in 1860, 160 years ago, the ancestors. Their ancestors today are still sending back to the village of their ancestors in India to get husbands and brides, and they are adamant they want to keep the genetic stock pure, and they want to make sure that their customs and habits and civilizational attitudes are kept sort of fresh and are updated through marriage, again, from the tribal villages. Now, if any other race did that, particularly if any white race did it, they'd be accused of being Nazis immediately, and it would be an international headline. But when brown and black people do it, what's wrong with that? That's fine, it's okay. But what it means is that they'll in effect never really integrate, and don't want to, and don't see why they should. Now they'll readily admit that their own country's a corrupt, hopeless basket case, a heaving mass of inefficiency, and that the West is much better run, it's cleaner, it's much better administered, it's much less corrupt. They concede all those things, but still believe themselves to be superior. How they work that one out, it's quite beyond me. But anyway, that's what they do, and so the assimilation from them is I think completely unlikely. Again, a very small number. Now, even Indians that are born in the West, born in Australia, they still send back to the village of their ancestors, and every child from the Indian diaspora that's born in Australia, there are matchmakers in India that have already arranged the marriage with someone in India, a husband or a bride. Now, if the locally born Indian young man, young woman decides no, they don't want to marry someone from the village of their ancestors, they'd rather marry somebody, even from the Indian diaspora in Australia or the West. They'd rather marry someone locally. Even there, they come under a lot of family pressure to not even countenance that. And the very idea of marrying outside the diaspora would result in, for most Indians at least, complete banishment. They'd be outcast, and so it's a rarity. And I don't see attitudes changing. Maybe huge financial incentives or something like that, but I don't know why you'd want any country would want to import people who have such views and attitudes and such rigidly held views and attitudes as well. So I don't think much to go. And there's a lot of there are entire sprawling suburbs in Western Sydney and elsewhere around Australia where there's nothing but Indian. Indian is spoken in the shops. There's you won't hear English spoken anywhere. And if you in some places, it looks like you're in downtown, New Delhi or something. So anyway, so it's them now. Looking now at the Arabs or people from the general Middle Eastern diaspora, there's a bit of a mix here, and you'd think some people are integrating quite well. There's for example, I'm just thinking of somebody now. There's a guy from Jordan who came out to Australia with his folks when he was 2 or 3 years old. So he's done all his schooling here. Bit of a thug actually in his attitude, but nonetheless he's reasonably ambitious. Actually, he's quite hardworking, and but when he was at the age where he wanted to get married, typically family pressure there was on him, because I think he was pushing 25, and the family was the women in the family particularly were giving him an endless hard time over it. So he I would have thought he'd have picked somebody local, but no, he imported a bride from Jordan, for goodness sake. So again, he came to Australia when he was 2 years old. He'd never been to Jordan. He knew nothing but Australia, but still and again, family pressure plays a big part in this, but nonetheless. Now another guy, he was a fairly devout Muslim from Egypt, and it wasn't even a matter for discussion. That again, the marriage was arranged when he was quite young, and so the bride was brought out from Egypt, and then now in all the Middle Eastern people I've known, and they don't. I can't think of one that's married outside the diaspora, but I'm sure there must be some, but I'm not aware of any. Again, the numbers will be very few. Some of them will marry locally born Arabic people, but again, typically from the region they came from as well, and they'll even talk about the new husband or bride comes from a good village, and this sort of thing, and it's so very little integration there. Again, if it's more than 2%, a lot of Chinese have come to Australia, not just from places like Hong Kong, but from mainland China. And you'd think the Hong Kong Chinese would have integrated reasonably well. They speak English. They've lived in what effectively was an English colony all their lives, but they don't really intermarry much either. There's probably a bit more of it than you would from some of the other groups, but it's nowhere near 10%. Nowhere near 10%. And they would rather send back to Hong Kong to get a husband or a wife, even for locally born, which surprised me. I thought the locally born Chinese from Hong Kong, the folks from Hong Kong, they'd have married intermarried, or would have been the most likely to intermarry. But again, even it's rare in that. So I don't see any integration occurring there, and the mainland Chinese, even less than that. Just looking at some of the others around, I mean, those are the main groups, but you get people coming from, say, the Philippines, and they integrate a little bit, but it's more a strategic integration. They're marrying the white guy, there's particularly Philippine women. They're marrying the white guy just so they can bring their entire village, their third and cousins and everyone over it. It's a sort of a tactical, strategic marriage rather than anything else. So there's that, but I can't see any. There's not much incentive, I guess, to intermarry, because the West is sort of saying, come over and you can come to the West and you can keep your culture intact. The multicultural bullshit, but you can keep your culture intact. You don't have to integrate or assimilate. Now, the consequences of that, of course, are huge, because all these groups are clamoring for special special handouts. They want their own politicians. Must be Chinese to represent, must be Indian, must be this, must be that, and so they're wanting all these handouts and all these special considerations, which is doing nothing but other than creating social division. So why any government would condone that? And I appreciate the globalists; they want social division, so it makes it easier for them to control things. But why any I mean, the longer term consequences of that are unpleasant for everybody. And if you want angry mobs roaming the streets, trying to like in the French Revolution or something, then this is the sort of thing that's going to create that sort of unpleasantness. So I don't know why they'd want it. But I don't see that if immigration was stopped today, that the situation will be much improved in regard to assimilation, unless other measures are also taken. Now, putting that to one side, let's assume the rate of migration, the huge force-fed black-brown migration to the West, again forced on us by the globalists. That makes it even harder to assimilate because when masses of Indians, for example, come in, they can go straight to entire suburbs, sprawling for miles and miles with nothing but Indians there, and they'll inevitably have a relative in there somewhere, and they'll go to the Indian community centres, they'll go to the Indian-only shops, and so on and so forth. And so there's the ones that come in. There's no assimilation. There's no reason for them to assimilate. But there's also, it adds a constant reminder of the old country and of the old ways and habits that are, so that this huge sort of wave of migration, it keeps the old country attitudes and views, keeps them fresh with this constant new supply of racial cannon fodder for the non-assimilation project. So that doesn't help. But if it was stopped, if this migration was stopped, and I think it should be, by the way, but if it was stopped, I don't see how the assimilation project would, or the idea of assimilation would be increased, as in more assimilation, more intermarrying, that type of thing. I don't think it would increase unless there are other measures taken to not so much force it necessarily, but certainly provide incentives and induce those sort of relationships, which are of course very, very rare. And when there's clearly a sort of when I first started traveling around the third world, where when I very first started, white people were still seen as very much the people in charge, the people with the money, people who could hand out favors and gifts and that sort of thing. And so they, the people I was coming across were very much along the lines, we'll do what you want because you've got all the money and all the power and all the the gift giving capacity, all the patronage, and in those sort of societies, many of which are very corrupt anyway, they tend to respect that sort of thing rather than other more sensible type of issues of respect, such as somebody's bright or hardworking or whatever. So I remember one time I was seeing a client, and the technicians that were meant to meet me there hadn't turned up, and it was like a piece of IT equipment sort of thing, and I knew how to fix it. There was something wrong with it. I knew how to fix it, so I took off my jacket and got out the screwdriver and thought, well, I better do it because I don't know when the technicians will turn up. And the CEO of the business, or one of the senior managers, came out, and he was in a bit of a state. He said, "You can't do that." You can't. Well, why? I said, "Well, why not? What's wrong with that?" He said, "No, you're the big white tuan, the big sir, the big boana. You can't be seen to do that. The people here, the plebs in his office, they can't see you doing that because they'll think less of you, and then they won't respect you." And so that sort of practicality of the West, that we see something needs to be done and we do it, which is for the common good. But in other cultures, that's no, you can't do that. the idea of protocol in the sense of respect and dignity and all that sort of thing. So without that, because now these people coming to the West have been taught by our own education system and by globalist propagandists and NGOs, they've been trained and taught to see white people as inferior, and if not inferior, certainly evil, and having committed vast evils over centuries. No one else has, of course, only white people. So that also is a barrier to integration. Why would you integrate with an inferior people who are guilty of so many human rights abuses and crimes and this, that, and the next thing? And of course, every race has done that. Some, many far more horrifically than whites have ever done. But that's swept away. That's ignored now. The globalist propaganda machine has whites as the only evil people in the world because they're the ones that aren't buckling to the globalist project. It's easy for these black, brown people from dirt poor basket case, banana republic, tin pot countries, because they come to the West, they get a good deal coming to the West. Who wouldn't want to come to a nice, clean, well-run, administered country? Who wouldn't want that? So they get benefits. The white people who are losing. So the white people have to be crushed, and that's what the globalist project has in its sights. But this too is a barrier to assimilation and integration, and needs to be addressed if we're going to have an assimilated society. And if we don't do this, I think it's going to be very unpleasant in the years to come. You've been with Tacitus today in your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.